So I'm playing this game and the guy plays the London. Now, those of you who have ever played against the London, you know it's a tough nut to crack. So I'm sitting here thinking about what to play and I was contemplating playing the move h5, which actually does have some ideas. If they play e3, the bishop gets trapped. But other than that, it's a pretty bad move. And while I was thinking about this, somehow I accidentally mouse slipped knight to h6. Like I have no idea how that happened. It just kind of ended up there. And I was like, "Well, okay." And my opponent just immediately took it. And I said, "All right, well, I'm gonna just pretend like that was intentional, like I planned on that." So what do if you mouse slip knight h6 and it gets captured? Well, you develop the bishop and you castle right away because that's the one benefit that I get from this. I can castle right away. Now, you might be thinking, but Nelson, your king is now open and your pawn structure is messed up, and you would be absolutely right. But if you move your king over and you move your rook over, now you've put your rook on the only half open file on the board. And I don't know, I've got the diagonal, I've got the file. Maybe something can happen here. So my opponent plays g3, puts any ideas along the g file to a halt, and I'm like, okay, well, what do you do when you've castled and your opponent hasn't castled yet and they're just sitting in the center of the board? Well, you attack the king. You try to open up the center. So I'm like, let's do it. I mean, I've got the bishop on this diagonal. Seems like it makes a lot of sense. Of course, what do London players do? They make their little pawn triangle and say, "Come and get me." So I'm like, okay, knight c6, and there is a threat here which I kind of didn't want to let happen. Maybe I could have, but I said no. Let's stop that. So I played f5. Now I realized I was going to lose the pawn, but then at least I get to trade off this bad bishop for white's good bishop, and I'm still have the plan to attack the king. E5. I'm like, look, I don't care how many pawns you defend. I'm going to keep attacking until I break through. All right. So this is getting interesting. Now I'm losing, but at least I'm starting to get a little bit of counterplay. Here's the rook, here's the bishop, here's the knight. We got a little bit of central control, and white still hasn't decided where the king is going. So I said, okay, d4. Like, let's go. Let's keep opening up the center. If white just trades everything, right? Takes, my knight's going to come in, and now my rook is involved, and my bishop's involved, and if my queen ends up there, I have a lot of threats, right? So, okay, takes, and now white finally decides, you know what, it's time to get out of the center, and they castle kingside. I said, okay, well, I'm going to take this. I'm going to bring my queen in. Now, this is actually threatening to take the knight if this queen ever moves. So right now, I can't do it. I just lose a rook for a knight, which is not a good trade. But if the queen, let's just say hypothetically, moves away, I could take this, and I end up getting two knights for my rook, which, all right, that's a good trade, right? So that's what I was kind of keeping an eye on. My opponent brings the rook over, and here we go, rook to f5. And what I'm trying to do is force the queen away from defending the knight, like I just mentioned, right? So, of course, they try to hold on by playing queen to g4. Now, what do you think I played? Well, if you had this idea in the back of your mind, you might have come up with the move h5. And I'm just saying, you know what? I'm forcing the queen to move to where it can't defend the knight. Now, it was a little tricky here, because if queen to e4 happened, initially I was thinking I could sacrifice the rook, and if the knight takes me, I would take the queen. But you can see the eval bar there saying the problem with that is the queen would just take, right? And everything is defended, and now I just lost my rook for a knight. But if queen e4 did happen, I could just simply trade queens, and then the knight on f3 is left undefended, and all of a sudden, black is winning. Okay, so it's pretty clever. It's pretty tricky, I should say. And my opponent plays queen to h4. And now, notice I have my setup here where I can sacrifice the rook for the two knights, which is exactly what I did. All right, so now it's starting to look a little bit better for me. Even though, white still has a few extra pawns, my king's actually pretty safe. Like, it's amazing, but this bishop's doing a good job defending. And the knight and the bishop against the rook, even a rook and a pawn, or sometimes a rook and two pawns, a lot of times the knight and the bishop is better, or it can at least compete with the rook, especially since this rook is kind of out of the game right now. White only really has this one rook. So I'm like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good. They bring the rook in, starting to create some threats, but they allow me now to capture that pawn. Not only do I take the pawn, look at my knight. My knight's a monster. It's defended by the bishop. It's attacking the rook. And notice this square right here. Look at that. That's a really nice looking fork. So I had my eye on that. For example, if white would have played the move rook here to defend this way, watch what I can do. Actually, I'll let you guys pause. What can I play here? if you had a chance to look at that, the simplest thing is just to take the rook with check, and when they capture back, I've opened up this square for my knight to come in, and now I take the queen, and this is a winning endgame. Now, Stockfish says there's actually a better move instead of giving up the queen to just simply bring the rook over and go for the threat here on f2. Apparently, it's pretty difficult to defend. If they bring the rook back, you just start taking stuff, and Stockfish says I'm just better this way. So lots of things I could have done. However, my opponent played the move rook to c7, and here I played what I think is a pretty nice move. So sometimes when you're in these endgames like this, just centralizing the queen is like a really strong thing to do. Like, it just puts the queen on a very nice square. And I don't know if you caught that little pop-up there, but my opponent actually resigned here. Now, they didn't just resign because of the position is not that bad. Like, yes, it looks like it is, so maybe they just didn't see that they had some moves to survive. But I think they were also thinking about the clock. They're down, to 35 seconds. I have 2 minutes. And they probably couldn't figure out a way to stop this. Now, Stockfish says c4, attacking the queen, is the way to go, which is crazy to me because it just looks like this should be winning. But then there's king h1, which is amazing. And if I take the queen, I lose my queen, and now white's winning. So I would have had to come up with something else there. I guess you just take this. Or, actually, yeah, I don't actually know what's the best move here. No, you go check, and then you move the queen up. Yeah, that would have been tough for me to find, I think. Anyway, opponent resigned. So the moral of the story is, if you're playing against the London, consider the move knight to h6. No, not really. It's really not a good move. I can't recommend that you guys play this. But it goes to show two things, I think. Number one, there's almost always a trade-off, unless you're talking about a really bad move, but there's almost always some kind of trade-off in chess. So, you look at this and you're like, ooh, doubled pawns, the king side is exposed. But what's the benefit? Well, I do have the bishop pair. Bishops are, slightly better. I can castle very quickly, which I did, which is a plus, right? And, I can use this file, which is also kind of a plus. Now, it didn't really help me because white, shut that down. But it's funny because this move g3, you remember what happened later in the game? Those weaknesses along the light squares are what happened, or why white resigned, right? Like, if we fast forward all the way here, this weakness, imagine if the pawn was here, that wouldn't even exist, but it does. And so in a way, I kind of won the game by forcing white to play g3, you might say. There's trade-offs. Anyway, it was an interesting game, and I wanted to share that with you guys. As always, stay sharp, play smart.